In this video, I will share a few ways to use a very fine yarn to create a sheer knitted fabric and some ideas to mix different yarns to create a more interesting fabric. The first one is very simple. I just did some stripes using a standard weight yarn and a very fine yarn. When I am just developing ideas, I like to do a quick cast on instead of an ear-up, for example. I have every other needle in action. I'm going to knit one row, and then I'm going to place my comb and claw weights. Then I put the rest of the needles in action. I also like to pull them all the way out as well, and then just knit rows. So now I knitted 10 rows in my regular yarn, and I will change it to my fine yarn and then knit 10 more rows. Then again, I will knit 10 rows with my regular yarn. Looking at the sample at this point, I feel like the stitches in the fine yarn are a bit flimsy, so I'm going to change my tension. I used tension 7 for all the previous rows in both yarns. Now for the rows I will be knitting with a fine yarn, I will change the tension to 0. I will be knitting 20 rows. For the rest of the sample, I will continue knitting different numbers of rows and alternating between the fine yarn in tension 0 and the standard yarn in tension 7. I thought it could be fun to try some partial knitting as well to see how that looks. I just pulled all the needles out except 5 on the edge and then put my carriage in holding position. I will knit 2 rows and then put another 5 needles in action and knit 2 more rows. I continue that until I have put all the needles in action. I repeated the same with the fine yarn from the opposite direction. I'm not sure if this would work perfectly as the sections with the fine yarn come up a bit smaller, but we could always knit straight rows in between the sections, which we do partial knitting with the standard yarn, just to make sure they're equal. This is just me experimenting. I hope this gives you some ideas for you to try. And this is the sample I just knitted. I really like how the sheer parts are see-through but not completely see-through, so I think a jumper like this could look really, really cool. Here is a close-up of the rows I knitted on tension 7 using the fine yarn, and I think they're a bit wonky. I don't think I would prefer to achieve this look, and I know some people might want to achieve this, but I personally prefer the tighter tension. This is the yarn I use. This is a yarn called Coast from Knoll. It's a 50-50 cotton wool blend. And this is a super fine recycled polyester, and I used 2 ends of that. For the next example, I experimented with a very fluffy mohair yarn. I just knitted 10 rows in the fine yarn, tension 0, and then 2 rows in the fluffy yarn, tension 10. Now I change again to tension 0 and knit with a fine yarn. Also, I thought it could look really cool to create some long stitch rows in the fluffy yarn. I have a video explaining in detail how to create a long stitch. I will link that below if you would like to watch it. The only problem was that I had difficulty pulling the long stitch with this yarn. You can see here how it kind of pulls the previous long stitch. Here is a better view of what I had to do to avoid that. So I'm holding the previous stitch with my right hand and then pull the next long stitch with my left hand. You can see here better what happens if you don't do that. It pulls the previous stitch, making it smaller, and then the stitches probably won't be equal. In this video you can see the development process. I didn't know this was going to happen, so I only knew after I tried it. Now I know that I wouldn't choose this yarn to create this design as it is quite troublesome. It is a shame because it looks really nice, but what can we do? I will just move on. I decided to try that using a different yarn, also quite fluffy but not as much as the previous one. This definitely works much better and I would not have any problems using it. This is what I do when I develop samples. I just want to try everything, and I was also very curious how using two different yarns could look using a punch card, so I tried that as well, and I used tension 5 for this sample. Here's a sample I just created. I love the long stitch sections. I think this can add a very nice detail in a garment. I don't think we need a lot of it, just a couple of stripes of these at the bottom of the garment or at the top. It really depends whatever you want to create. Looking at the punch card sample, this is quite a random design, could look interesting, but I'm not sure if I like it very much. But these are all just ideas for you to try if you want to. This is the punch card I use. It's just an abstract design I created when I was in university. Doesn't make much sense, but it's just for fun. Here is the yarn I used. I'm not sure where these yarns are coming from because they've been gifted to me. All I know that one of them is a mohair blend, and one of them, the blue one, is a merino viscose blend, and I really like this yarn. It's really, really nice. This is the last sample I did. It's also a punch card. I used some lamb's wool from Todd & Duncan 117 lamb's wool and the very fine polyester I showed you at the beginning. I knitted this sample using tension 1. I really like this one. I think I like even the wrong side of it. I think it would look even nicer once the wool will be washed. This is the punch card that I used. They were meant to be little flowers, but they don't necessarily look like it, but it's still a very nice pattern. In this sample, I used a very fine white viscose and the fluffy yarn I used for the long stitch. You cannot really see what's happening, but I think that's the beauty of experimenting. We try and then we decide what works and what we like, and as long as we enjoy the process, it doesn't really matter. I hope you got a few ideas from this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.